This is the story of Elliot Grant, a man who thought his purpose died with his son, until one frozen night showed him that sometimes our greatest losses prepare us for our most unexpected blessings. Before we get into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. The streets were empty, except for the sound of distant carols and Elliot Grant's footsteps crunching through fresh snow. Most families were tucked away in warm homes, sharing laughter and gifts. But Elliot Grant walked alone through the shadows. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to escape the suffocating silence of his empty apartment. That's when he heard it, the sound of someone sobbing, muffled and desperate, coming from the alley beside the old marketplace. Elliot slowed, then stopped completely. What he saw next broke his heart. There, hunched over a large trash bin, was an elderly woman. She wore an elegant coat, her silver hair neatly styled, but her frail hands desperately searched through the refuse as if her life depended on it. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking with each word.
Elliot hesitated. Every instinct told him to keep walking, to mind his own business. He had enough pain of his own to carry without taking on someone else's. But something about her cry pierced straight through his chest. A sound of loss so raw, it made his own grief echo in response. "Ma'am?" he called softly, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" The woman spun around with surprising speed, her eyes clouded but intense. Before Elliot could react, she lunged forward and grabbed his arm with strength that belied her frail appearance. "Daniel, you came back!" she sobbed, pressing her face against his sleeve. "Oh, my boy, don't leave me again. Please don't leave me." Elliot's heart twisted. She wasn't seeing him, she was seeing someone else, someone who meant everything to her. The desperation in her grip, the way she clung to him like he was her lifeline, reminded him of another pair of small hands that had once held on to him just as tightly. For a moment, he considered pulling away, making excuses, disappearing back into the night. But then he looked into her eyes and saw something he recognized all too well. The look of someone drowning in grief, gasping for any thread of hope to hold on to.
"I'm here," Elliot said gently, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm not leaving." The woman collapsed against him, her sobs shaking both their bodies. She smelled faintly of lavender soap and expensive perfume, scents that spoke of a life very different from this alley. Elliot wrapped a careful arm around her shoulders, feeling how thin she was beneath the heavy coat. "Let's get you somewhere warm," he murmured, guiding her slowly away from the trash bins. "It's too cold to be out here." She didn't resist, didn't question where they were going. She just held on to his arm and whispered the same name over and over. "Daniel. My Daniel." Elliot's small apartment had never felt more inadequate than it did when he guided the elderly woman inside. The place was sparse, a couch with faded cushions, a small table, a kitchenette that had seen better days. But it was warm, and right now, that's all that mattered. The woman stood in the middle of the living room, looking around with confusion. Her eyes, clearer now in the light, settled on a framed photograph on the shelf. A little boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, holding a toy airplane.
"He's beautiful," she whispered, and for the first time since he'd found her, her voice sounded completely lucid. "How old?" Elliot's throat tightened. "He was 6. The woman's gaze sharpened, catching the past tense. She looked at him with sudden understanding, and in that moment, two broken hearts recognized each other without needing more words. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Me too," Elliot replied. They stood in silence for a long moment, two strangers connected by the universal language of loss. Finally, Elliot gestured to the couch. "Please, sit. I'll make some tea." As he busied himself in the kitchenette, Elliot found his mind wandering to the photograph on the shelf. Aaron had been gone for almost a year now, but Christmas Eve always brought the memories flooding back. The way his son's eyes had lit up at the sight of wrapped presents, the sound of his laughter echoing through these same rooms, the gradual dimming of that light as the sickle cell disease slowly stole his strength. "What was his name?" the woman asked softly. "Aaron." Elliot's hands trembled slightly as he poured hot water over tea bags. "He loved airplanes. Said he was going to be a pilot when he grew up."
"And Daniel wanted to build skyscrapers," the woman said, her voice distant. "He used to stack blocks as high as his little arms could reach, then knock them down and start all over again." Elliot turned, studying her face. The confusion from earlier was completely gone now, replaced with a sharp awareness that suggested this woman was far more than she appeared. "I'm Elliot," he said, bringing her a steaming mug. "Elliot Grant." She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, inhaling the steam. "Veronica. Veronica Wilson." The name meant nothing to Elliot, but something in the way she said it suggested it should. She seemed to read his expression and smiled sadly. "Most people know the name. Or used to, anyway. These days, I'm just the crazy old woman they keep locked away." "Locked away?" Elliot asked, settling into the chair across from her. Veronica's laugh was bitter. "The Golden Years Care Facility. That's what they call it, anyway. Makes it sound like..."
She took a sip of tea, and Elliot noticed her hands, elegant despite their age, with faint tan lines where expensive rings had once been. "My family couldn't wait to put me there. Said it was for my own safety after the diagnosis. Alzheimer's, you see. Early stages, but enough to give them the excuse they needed." "What about your son, Daniel?" The cup shook in her hands. "Daniel died 2 years ago. Car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was coming to have lunch with me, to discuss expanding the foundation we'd started together." Her voice cracked. "He never made it." Elliot felt the familiar weight of parental grief settle over the room. "I'm sorry. After he was gone, everything changed. The family I thought loved me suddenly couldn't be bothered with visits. The board members who used to hang on my every word started making decisions without consulting me. And then came the diagnosis, and they had all the justification they needed to push me aside. Next thing I knew, I was in that alley, and I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there." Elliot leaned forward. "How did you get out of the facility?" A small smile played at the corners of Veronica's mouth. "There's a nurse there, Stella. Sweet girl. Works double shifts to support her younger brother. She understood what tonight meant to me. Left a door unlocked. Looked the other way. She could lose her job if anyone found out." The pieces were starting to come together. This wasn't just a confused elderly woman. This was someone who had once held power, influence, wealth. Someone whose family had systematically stripped all of that away the moment it became convenient. "They think I don't know what they're doing," Veronica said, her voice growing stronger. "Think the disease has made me stupid instead of just forgetful. But I see the way they look at me, like I'm already dead, like they're just waiting for the formalities to be over so they can divide up what's left." Elliot thought about his own sparse surroundings, the pile of unpaid bills on his kitchen counter, the way he'd been invisible to the world since Aaron died. Different circumstances, but the same feeling of being discarded, forgotten. "Why did you think I was Daniel?" he asked gently. Veronica looked at him with clear eyes. "You have his build, his height, and when you found me in that alley, Daniel always came when I needed him most. Even in my confusion, something told me you wouldn't hurt me. I don't understand why." The next morning came too soon. Elliot awoke to find Veronica sitting at his small kitchen table, already dressed and composed, looking more like the formidable woman she must have once been. She said without preamble, "I should go back. Stella will be worried sick, and if they discover I was gone, what happens to her if they find out she helped you? She loses her job. Maybe worse. They're not kind people, my family." Veronica's jaw tightened. They'd make an example of her to ensure no one else gets any ideas about helping the crazy old woman. To reconcile this woman with the confused, desperate person he'd found in the alley.
"The confusion comes and goes," she said, reading his thoughts. "Some days are better than others, but they're getting worse, and everyone knows it. That's what makes this so easy for them." As they prepared to leave, Veronica paused in front of Aaron's photograph. "How did you survive it, losing him?" Elliot was silent for a long moment. "I'm not sure I have survived it. Most days, I just exist." "Yes," she whispered, "that's exactly how it feels." The Golden Years Care Facility was a sprawling complex on the edge of town, all manicured lawns and tasteful architecture designed to look welcoming rather than institutional. As they approached the main entrance, Elliot could see a young woman pacing frantically by the reception desk. "Stella," Veronica murmured. The nurse spotted them through the glass doors and ran outside, her face a mixture of relief and panic.
"Mrs. Wilson! Thank goodness you're safe. I've been going out of my mind when I checked on you this morning and found your bed empty." She trailed off, noticing Elliot for the first time. "Who is this?" "This is Elliot," Veronica said simply. "He helped me when I got lost." Stella's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You have no idea what could have happened if—" She stopped, looking around nervously. "We need to get inside, if anyone sees us talking out here." As they walked through the facility's corridors, Elliot was struck by how quiet everything was. A few residents sat in common areas, staring at television screens or out windows, but there was no sense of life or community, just people waiting. "Mrs. Wilson," a sharp voice cut through the quiet. A stern-looking woman in a crisp uniform approached them, her expression thunderous. "Where exactly have you been? We've had the entire staff looking for you." "I went for a walk," Veronica said calmly. "I got turned around." "A walk? At night? In December?" "Mrs. Wilson, your condition makes it dangerous for you to leave the facility unescorted. We've discussed this." Elliot watched the interaction, seeing how quickly Veronica seemed to shrink under the woman's authority. This wasn't care, this was control. "And you are?" The woman turned to Elliot, her tone suggesting he was already unwelcome. "A friend," he said simply. "Well, friend, visiting hours don't start until 2 p.m. Mrs. Wilson needs her rest after her little adventure." Stella shot Elliot an apologetic look as the supervisor began leading Veronica away. But before they could disappear down the hall, Veronica turned back. "Will you come see me?" she asked, and there was something in her voice, hope maybe, or just the fear of being forgotten again. "Yes," Elliot said without hesitation. "I'll come see you." Sometimes healing comes not from forgetting our pain, but from using it to comfort others. Watch how two grieving hearts found strength in each other. Elliot kept his promise. He started visiting Veronica 3 times a week, usually in the evenings when the facility was quieter and the supervisor was off duty. Stella, grateful beyond words for his help that Christmas Eve, always made sure he could spend time with Veronica without interference. During their visits, Elliot learned more about the woman behind the confusion and grief. Veronica Wilson had been a force of nature in her prime, building a business empire alongside her late husband, then expanding it with Daniel after her husband's death. She'd been known for her sharp mind, her philanthropy, her unwavering dedication to causes she believed in.
"We were working on something special when Daniel died," she told him during one visit, her voice clearer than it had been in weeks. "A foundation to help children with rare diseases. Daniel had a friend in college who died from muscular dystrophy, and it always haunted him that money had been the barrier to better treatment." Elliot felt his chest tighten. That sounds like something Daniel would have cared about. Oh, he did. He was passionate about it. We'd already committed $50 million to get it started, but then— She trailed off, staring out the window. "After he died, the board convinced me to put the project on hold, said it wasn't a good time for major new initiatives. I should have fought harder." As weeks turned into months, Elliot found himself looking forward to these visits more than he'd anticipated. Veronica was fascinating when her mind was clear, full of stories about building her business, raising Daniel, navigating a world that hadn't always been kind to powerful women. And when the confusion took hold, he simply sat with her, holding her hand and letting her talk about Daniel as if he might walk through the door at any moment.
In return, he told her about Aaron, about his son's love of airplanes and building blocks, about the bedtime stories and the way Aaron would fall asleep holding his favorite toy car, about the long nights in the hospital when hope and despair had battled in his chest until there was nothing left but acceptance. "You're a good father," Veronica said one evening, and Elliot felt something in his chest that he hadn't experienced in months, a warmth that might have been healing. It was during one of these visits that he first met Stella properly. She was changing shifts as he arrived, and instead of hurrying past, she stopped to talk. "I can't tell you what your visits mean to her," Stella said, her voice soft with gratitude. "She lights up every time I tell her you're coming. For months after Daniel died, she barely spoke to anyone. You've given her something to look forward to again." Stella was younger than Elliot had initially thought, probably in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a gentleness that spoke of someone who truly cared about her work. She told him about her younger brother, Marcus, who she was putting through college while he struggled with a learning disability that made traditional academics difficult.
"He's brilliant," she said proudly, "just learns differently. But the tutoring and special programs cost so much, and this job is all I have." As their friendship grew, Elliot found himself staying longer at the facility, talking with Stella after his visits with Veronica. She had a way of listening that reminded him what it felt like to be seen, to matter to someone. It had been so long since he'd felt that kind of connection that he'd almost forgotten it was possible. But it was Veronica who noticed the change in him first. "You smile when you talk about her," she observed one evening, her eyes twinkling with mischief despite her condition. "We're just friends," Elliot protested, but Veronica waved a dismissive hand. "Daniel used to say the same thing about Sarah before he finally admitted he was in love with her. Of course, he died before he could propose, but—" She trailed off, the brightness fading from her expression. These moments of clarity, followed by confusion, were becoming more frequent. Some days, Veronica would be sharp as ever, discussing business strategies and current events with impressive insight. Other days, she would call him Daniel and ask when they were going home. Elliot learned to roll with these fluctuations, following her lead and providing whatever comfort she needed in the moment. It was Stella who warned him that things were getting worse. "The family's been asking questions," she said quietly one evening as they walked to the parking lot together. "They want to know about her visitors, her daily routine, everything. And there's talk about moving her to a higher security wing." "Higher security?" "For residents with advanced dementia. Locked doors, restricted visiting hours, much more control over who comes and goes." Elliot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "They want to isolate her completely." "I think they're getting impatient," Stella said, "waiting for her condition to deteriorate enough that they can make decisions without her input." "What kind of decisions?" Stella looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "There's a nephew, Kelvin Wilson. He's been meeting with the board of directors more and more frequently." The pieces clicked together in Elliot's mind. They weren't just warehousing Veronica until she died. They were actively waiting for her to become incompetent enough that they could take control of everything she'd built. Does she know? I think part of her does. On her good days, she makes comments about vultures circling. But on her bad days, Stella shook her head. On her bad days, she's completely vulnerable. The crisis came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Elliot arrived for his usual visit to find the facility in chaos. Stella met him at the entrance, her face pale and eyes red from crying. "She's gone," Stella whispered, grabbing his arm. "Mrs. Wilson. She passed away this afternoon." The world seemed to tilt around Elliot. What happened? The doctor said it was a heart attack, sudden, peaceful. But Elliot, Stella's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She'd been having a good day, clear, alert, more like herself than she'd been in weeks. And then suddenly, around 3 o'clock, Elliot felt numb. Another loss, another person he'd come to care about taken away without warning.
The grief was different from losing Aaron, less raw but somehow more bitter, because this felt preventable, inevitable, like watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion.
Did she suffer?
No. The doctor said it was very quick. She was in her room, sitting by the window. When the aide found her, she looked peaceful.
They stood in the lobby, surrounded by the sterile comfort of the facility, and Elliot felt the familiar weight of loss settle over him again. Just when he'd started to believe that maybe he could build something new from the wreckage of his old life, death had come calling again. "There's something else," Stella said quietly. "The family's already been here, making arrangements, going through her room. They didn't seem very sad." Of course they weren't. For them, this was the moment they'd been waiting for, the final obstacle removed from their path to Veronica's fortune. As Elliot drove home that night, he thought about all the conversations he and Veronica had shared, all the stories about Daniel and Aaron, all the quiet moments when two broken hearts had found comfort in each other's company. She'd given him something precious, a reason to care about another human being, a path back to feeling like he mattered in the world. Now she was gone, and he was alone again. Or so he thought.
The phone call came 3 days later, just as Elliot was preparing to leave for Veronica's funeral. A crisp, professional voice introduced himself as Richard Hartwell, senior partner at Hartwell, Barnes & Associates, and Mrs. Wilson's longtime attorney. "Mr. Grant, I need you to come to my office immediately following the funeral today. There's a matter of utmost importance that requires your attention." "I think you have the wrong person," Elliot said. "I was just a friend of Mrs. Wilson's. I don't have anything to do with her affairs." "Mr. Grant," the lawyer's voice took on a tone of barely contained excitement, "you have everything to do with her affairs. Please, just come to my office after the service. Everything will be explained then." The funeral was a small, cold affair. Veronica's family was there, a collection of well-dressed people who looked more concerned with being seen than with mourning Veronica. Stella sat in the back with Elliot, both of them sharing memories of the woman who had brought them together. Kelvin Wilson stood at the podium during the service, delivering a eulogy that sounded more like a business presentation than a... "She will be remembered," Kelvin concluded, "for the empire she built and the wealth she accumulated. But mostly, she'll be remembered as a loving family member who trusted us to carry on her work." Elliot felt sick listening to the hollow words. This wasn't the Veronica he'd known, the sharp, passionate woman who cared deeply about helping others, who'd found purpose in her pain and meaning in her memories of Daniel. After the service, Elliot and Stella drove to the law office in tense silence. The building was impressive, all marble and dark wood, speaking of old money and established power. Richard Hartwell was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Thank you both for coming," he said, gesturing to chairs in front of his massive desk. "What I'm about to tell you will come as a shock, so please bear with me." He opened a thick folder and withdrew an official-looking document. "This is Mrs. Wilson's last will and testament, executed 6 months ago during one of her periods of complete mental clarity. I had 3 independent doctors examine her to ensure she was fully competent when she made these decisions." Hartwell looked directly at Elliot. "Mr. Grant, Mrs. Wilson has left you the entirety of her estate." The words didn't compute. Elliot stared at the lawyer, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Her entire estate. The house, the investment portfolio, her shares in Wilson Industries, all personal property, and approximately $2.3 billion in liquid assets. Everything." Stella gasped audibly. Elliot felt like the room was spinning. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. I just visited her a few times." Hartwell smiled.
According to Mrs. Wilson, you were the only person who visited her because you cared about her, not because you wanted something from her. She was very specific in her instructions. She said you showed her kindness when she was lost, and that you reminded her what family was supposed to feel like. The lawyer continued reading from the will. To Elliot Grant, who found me in my darkest hour and showed me that goodness still exists in the world. You gave me back my son's spirit through your own father's heart. Use what I leave you to honor both our boys and to help other families who face what we have faced.
Elliot's vision blurred with tears. Even in death, Veronica had found a way to surprise him. Of course, Hartwell added, this won't go unchallenged. The family is already threatening to contest the will. They'll claim she was incompetent, that you manipulated her somehow. Are you prepared for that fight? What would you do if someone tried to steal a gift meant to honor the memory of someone you loved? Elliot's answer will inspire you. The Wilson family's response was swift and vicious. Within hours of the will reading, Elliot's phone was ringing constantly. Reporters, lawyers, distant relatives he'd never heard of, all wanting to know about the nobody who'd inherited a fortune. Kelvin Wilson held a press conference the very next day, standing on the steps of the courthouse with his team of attorneys. This is a clear case of elder abuse, he declared to the cameras. My aunt was vulnerable, suffering from dementia, and this man took advantage of her condition to manipulate her into changing her will. We will fight this injustice with every resource at our disposal. The media ate it up. Gold digger steals billions, screamed the headlines. Fortune hunter preys on elderly heiress. Photos of Elliot leaving his modest apartment appeared next to pictures of Veronica's mansion, the contrast telling a story that had little to do with the truth.
Elliot tried to go about his normal routine, but reporters camped outside his building, following him to work, shouting questions about his relationship with Veronica. He stopped visiting the facility where she'd lived, not wanting to bring trouble to Stella or the other staff members. It was Stella who called him a week later, her voice shaking with fear. Elliot, you need to be careful. Some men came to the facility, asking questions about you and Mrs. Wilson. They weren't reporters. They felt different, dangerous. What kind of questions? About your visits, how long you stayed, whether you were ever alone with her. And they offered me money, a lot of money, to sign a statement saying I'd witnessed you pressuring her or acting inappropriately. Elliot's blood chilled. What did you tell them? The truth, that you were nothing but kind to her, that she lit up whenever you came to visit. But Elliot, her voice broke. They said they'd be back. They said they had ways of making people remember things differently.
That night, Elliot sat in his apartment staring at the legal papers Hartwell had given him. The will was ironclad, witnessed, notarized, verified by multiple doctors. But he could feel the walls closing in around him. The Wilson family had resources, connections, power he couldn't begin to match. Maybe it would be easier to just walk away, to let them have their blood money and disappear back into obscurity. He was still debating when his phone rang. Richard Hartwell's voice was grim. Elliot, we have a problem. Kelvin Wilson just filed an emergency motion claiming you're a flight risk. He wants all of Veronica's assets frozen until the will contest is resolved. Can he do that? He's trying. The hearing is tomorrow morning. If the judge grants the motion, you won't be able to access anything, not the money, not the house, nothing, until this mess is settled. And given the media coverage, that could take years. Elliot closed his eyes. What do you recommend? Fight. Veronica chose you for a reason. Don't let her nephew steal what she wanted you to have. But before Elliot could respond, there was a knock at his door, urgent, demanding. He looked through the peephole and saw two men in expensive suits, their faces hard and professional. Mr. Grant, we'd like to have a word with you about Mrs. Wilson. Elliot backed away from the door, his heart pounding.
These weren't lawyers or reporters. These were the kind of men Stella had warned him about. "We know you're in there," the second man said, his voice carrying a subtle threat. "This can be easy or it can be hard. Your choice." Elliot grabbed his phone and dialed Hartwell's number with shaking fingers. "They're here, at my apartment. Who's there?" "I don't know. Men. They don't feel like lawyers." "Get out. Now. Use the fire escape if you have to. Come to my office immediately." The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of legal motions, depositions, and increasingly desperate tactics from the Wilson family. Elliot had moved into a small hotel under an assumed name, venturing out only when necessary and always watching over his shoulder. Hartwell proved to be more than just a lawyer. He was a warrior. He countered every motion, challenged every claim, and slowly built an airtight case for Veronica's mental competence at the time she'd made her will. "They're getting desperate," he told Elliot during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "The medical evidence is overwhelming. 3 independent psychiatrists examined Veronica before she signed the will, and all of them declared her completely lucid and capable of making her own decisions."
Then why do they keep fighting? Because they're not just fighting for the money anymore. They're fighting for their reputations. If this will stands, it means Veronica deliberately chose a stranger over her own family. It makes them look like the vultures they actually are. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Stella called Elliot one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found something. In Mrs. Wilson's room after she died. The staff was supposed to pack everything up for the family, but I kept one thing. She kept a journal, Elliot, and she wrote about you." They met at an all-night diner on the outskirts of town, away from reporters and whoever else might be watching. Stella slid a leather-bound notebook across the table, her hands trembling. "I probably shouldn't have taken this, but something told me it was important." Elliot opened the journal and immediately recognized Veronica's handwriting, elegant, strong, completely coherent. The entries were dated, starting just after Christmas Eve and continuing right up to the week before she died. January 3rd. Elliot visited again today. We talked about Aaron and Daniel, about how grief changes shape but never truly goes away. He doesn't know it, but he's saving my life just by showing up. For the first time in 2 years, I have something to look forward to.
January 20th. The family came today. Kelvin barely looked at me. Just talked to the doctors about my condition, as if I weren't in the room. After they left, I called Richard to discuss updating my will. If something happens to me, I want to make sure the foundation Daniel and I planned actually gets built. Elliot understands loss in a way these vultures never will. Page after page documented their friendship, Veronica's growing appreciation for Elliot's character, and her increasing disgust with her family's behavior. But it was the final entry that made Elliot's breath catch. March 8th. I can feel myself slipping more often now. The confusion comes faster, lasts longer. But today was a good day, and I used it to finalize everything with Richard. Elliot doesn't know what I've done, and he'll probably try to refuse it at first. But I've seen his heart. He'll use what I'm leaving him to help people the way Daniel would have done, the way Aaron would have grown up to do. My family will fight it, of course, but I've made sure the will is unbreakable. Let them try to prove I was incompetent. Every word I've written in this journal shows exactly how clear my mind was when I made this decision. Elliot looked up at Stella, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. She knew, he said quietly. She knew exactly what she was doing. "There's more," Stella said. "I found receipts, bank statements, and documentation of every meeting she had with lawyers and doctors. She kept meticulous records, like she was building a case." The journal and supporting documents turned the tide of the legal battle. When Hartwell presented them in court, even Kelvin's expensive lawyers couldn't argue with the clear evidence of Veronica's mental competence and deliberate intentions. But Kelvin wasn't ready to give up. If he couldn't win in court, he'd find another way to get what he believed was rightfully his. The kidnapping happened on a rainy Tuesday evening.
Elliot was waiting for Stella outside the diner where they'd been meeting for dinner. Their relationship had deepened during the stress of the legal battle, providing both of them with an anchor in the chaos. When she didn't show up after an hour, Elliot called her cell phone. A stranger's voice answered. "Mr. Grant, I have something that belongs to you." Elliot's blood turned to ice. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now, but that depends entirely on your cooperation. You're going to sign some papers for us, documents transferring Mrs. Wilson's estate back to her rightful heirs. Do that, and your girlfriend goes home unharmed."
The warehouse district at night was a maze of shadows and empty buildings. Industrial decay stretched along the waterfront like forgotten memories. Elliot arrived 15 minutes early, circling the area to get a sense of the layout while staying in constant contact with Detective Morrison, who was coordinating the police response from several blocks away. "Remember," Morrison's voice crackled through the earpiece, "we need evidence of the kidnapping before we can move in. Get them talking. Get them to admit what they've done. We'll be monitoring everything, but you need to stay calm and keep them engaged." Elliot checked the briefcase one more time. Inside were the transfer documents Hartwell had prepared, legally worthless papers that would never hold up in court, but realistic enough to fool someone desperate. The real will remained safely in the lawyer's vault, but if these documents could buy Stella's freedom, they'd served their purpose. At exactly 8 o'clock, Elliot approached the designated warehouse. The building was massive, 3 stories of broken windows and rusted steel that had once been the heart of the city's shipping industry. A single light glowed from a window on the second floor. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of oil, rust, and decades of neglect. Elliot's footsteps echoed as he made his way toward the stairs, following the sound of voices from above.
"Mr. Grant," a familiar voice called out as he reached the second floor. "So good of you to join us." Kelvin Wilson stepped out of the shadows, flanked by the 2 men who had come to Elliot's apartment weeks earlier. Behind them, tied to a chair, but visibly unharmed, was Stella. Her eyes met Elliot's, and he saw fear mixed with defiance. "Let her go," Elliot said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I brought what you wanted." Kelvin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Did you really think it would be that simple? You've caused me a lot of trouble, Mr. Grant. Cost me a lot of money. Before this is over, I want to make sure you understand the consequences of stealing from the Wilson family." "I didn't steal anything. Veronica chose to leave me her estate." "Veronica was a sick old woman who lost her mind," Kelvin spat. "You manipulated her, took advantage of her condition, and convinced her to betray her own blood. That money belongs to the family." Elliot kept his voice calm, knowing the police were recording everything. "Is that why you kidnapped Stella? Because you couldn't win in court?"
"I did what was necessary to protect what's rightfully mine," Kelvin said, and Elliot felt a surge of satisfaction. The confession was clear, recorded, more than enough for the police to act. But Kelvin wasn't done. "The transfer documents, Mr. Grant." Put the briefcase on the table and step back. Elliot complied, watching as one of Kelvin's men opened the case and examined the papers. The man nodded to Kelvin, who smiled with genuine pleasure for the first time since Elliot had arrived. "Excellent. You know, I almost wish my aunt could see this. She was always so proud of her judge of character. I wonder what she'd think now, seeing you cave in the moment things got difficult." "She'd understand," Elliot said quietly. "She'd understand that some things matter more than money." Kelvin laughed harshly. "Noble words from a man who's about to give up billions of dollars. But you're forgetting something, Mr. Grant. Even with these documents, you still know too much. You've seen too much. You could change your mind, go to the police, cause more trouble for me." The implication hung in the air like poison. Elliot felt ice in his veins as he realized that Kelvin had never intended to let them walk away alive. Which brings us to the real reason we're here, Kelvin continued, pulling a gun from inside his jacket. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about cleaning up loose ends.
That's when Detective Morrison's voice exploded through hidden speakers positioned around the warehouse. "Police! Drop your weapons and put your hands in the air!" Chaos erupted. Kelvin spun toward the sound of the voice, his gun wavering between Elliot and the darkness beyond. His two associates drew their own weapons, scanning for threats they couldn't see. "This is a trap," one of them shouted. "No," Kelvin said, his voice deadly calm. "This is just poor planning on their part." He turned the gun toward Stella, his finger tightening on the trigger. "If I can't have the money, at least I can make sure you suffer for taking it." Elliot didn't think. He lunged forward, tackling Kelvin just as the gun went off. The bullet went wild, sparking off a steel beam as both men crashed to the floor. Behind them, Stella screamed as police officers rappelled through the warehouse windows, their weapons trained on Kelvin's associates. The fight was brief, but vicious. Kelvin was desperate, clawing and kicking as Elliot struggled to keep the gun pointed away from anyone important. They rolled across the dirty floor, Kelvin cursing and threatening while Elliot fought just to stay alive. It ended when Detective Morrison put his boot on Kelvin's wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon.
Kelvin Wilson, you're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, and attempted murder, Morrison said, hauling the man to his feet. You have the right to remain silent. Elliot stumbled to Stella, cutting her bonds with shaking hands. She threw her arms around him, sobbing with relief. I thought he was going to kill you when he pulled out that gun. It's over, Elliot said, holding her close. It's finally over. If this story reminded you that your pain can become your purpose, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories that show how love transforms everything, even in our darkest moments. 1 year later, Elliot stood before a crowd of reporters, medical professionals, and families affected by rare diseases. The grand opening of the Danron Treatment Center was everything Veronica had envisioned when she'd first planned her foundation with Daniel. The facility was state-of-the-art, designed specifically to provide comprehensive care for children with rare diseases and their families. It offered not just medical treatment, but also support services, counseling, and research into new therapies. Most importantly, it provided hope.
Stella stood beside him, her engagement ring catching the morning sunlight. They'd been married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony at the nursing home where they'd met, surrounded by the staff members who would become their extended family. When I lost my son Aaron to sickle cell disease, Elliot told the crowd, I thought my story was over. I thought the pain would be all that remained of our time together. But I've learned that sometimes our greatest losses prepare us for our most important work. He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, some hopeful, some desperate, all carrying the weight of loving someone with this devastating disease. This center exists because of an extraordinary woman named Veronica Wilson, who believed that our shared pain could become our shared purpose. She taught me that healing doesn't come from forgetting our losses, but from using them to prevent others from suffering the same way. During the reception following the opening ceremony, Elliot found himself standing before the memorial wall in the center's main lobby. 3 photographs hung there. Aaron with his gap-toothed smile and toy airplane, Daniel's portrait highlighting his bright blue eyes, and Veronica in her prime, elegant and determined. Below their pictures was a plaque engraved with Veronica's final words from her will. Use what I leave you to honor both our boys and to help other families who face what we have faced. They would be proud, Stella said softly, joining him in front of the wall. I hope so, Elliot replied. I hope they know that their lives mattered, that their love didn't end with their deaths. As the day wound down and the last visitors toured the facility, Elliot and Stella walked through the empty halls together. The center was quiet now, but tomorrow it would be filled with children and families, doctors and researchers, all working together toward the same goal, ensuring that no parent would have to watch their child suffer without hope. In his pocket,
Elliot carried the toy car that had once belonged to Aaron, the same one his son had clutched during those final days in the hospital. He'd kept it all this time as a reminder of what he'd lost. Now it served a different purpose, a reminder of what was still possible, what could still be saved, what love could still accomplish, even in the face of the most devastating loss. The circle was complete. Veronica had found him in an alley, lost and searching for something she couldn't name. He'd helped her find her way back to safety, back to dignity, back to purpose. In return, she'd given him the tools to transform his pain into something beautiful. Veronica was gone, but her belief in the power of compassion to change the world continued to ripple outward, touching lives she'd never meet. And Elliot, the broken single father who'd thought his story was over, had discovered that sometimes the most important chapters come after you think the book has ended. As they locked the doors and headed home together, Stella slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked.
Elliot smiled, looking back at the building that represented hope for so many families. "I'm thinking about Christmas Eve," he said, "about how the worst night of my year became the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me. Because you found Veronica?" "Because I chose to help her," Elliot corrected. "Because even when I thought I had nothing left to give, I gave it anyway. And somehow that act of giving brought me everything I never knew I needed." They walked home through streets that looked the same as they had a year ago, but everything had changed. Where once there had been only loss and emptiness, now there was purpose and love. Where once there had been only an ending, now there was a new beginning. And in the lives of the children who would grow up healthy because of the Danaron Treatment Center, the story would continue for generations to come, a testament to the power of compassion to transform tragedy into triumph and loss into lasting legacy. True family isn't about the circumstances that bring you together. It's about the choice to stay together no matter what challenges come your way. And sometimes when you open your heart to help someone else, you discover that they were helping you all along. Every act of kindness has the power to change the world, one life at a time. Every moment of pain can become a source of healing for others, and every ending can become a new beginning if we have the courage to let love lead the way. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you of the power we all have to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Soul Lift Stories family. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't measured by their wallet.